Let me pray and we'll start. God, thanks for the opportunity to think biblically and intentionally about our lives and how they're lived. We don't want to get to the end and coast. We don't want the last 20 years to be resentment and bitterness and anger. We want it to be joy. We want it to be full. We want it to be juicy. And so, Holy Spirit, prompt conversations in us with our spouse tonight that allow us to make decisions, that allow us to experience what we say we want to experience. We pray this in Jesus' name, and everyone said. And now, before I told you, read over that, scan over that. Any parts of that you're like, I got no idea what this is. I need you to explain this when you get to it. Bueller. Mark Hackler, you got anything? You're letting Debbie look on for you. You're good. Yes.
I got one. Under marriage and midlife, letter E.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. That's why the board is here. Most people come to me. I do a lot of marriage counseling. Like on average, an average week, I do anywhere from 6 to 12. The 12-session weeks are brutal. I just kind of go home like Rocky and sit on my stool and go, cut me, Mick. My wife's not seen Rocky, so it's lost on her. But basically, people come to see me because, I'll do it from y'all's perspective, because of their experience of marriage, the way they experience their marriage. But their experience of marriage is based on the way they come back this way. One is the way they structured their marriage. The way they structure their marriage is based on, is affected by the agreements that they've made in marriage. The agreements that they made in marriage were informed and affected by the agreements they made in childhood. The agreements they made in childhood, last stop, is based on the trauma they experienced in childhood. I'll give you an example. I see a couple for counseling. They don't go. Now, by the way, people every once in a while joke our church, go, I'm not going to come see you because you'll talk about me in a sermon. Anytime I talk about a couple, it's people that I've worked with for a long time. They're like, hey, if our story helps, please tell our story. I don't use people's names or whatever. Is my wife around here anywhere? Let me text my wife, and I'll get her to make some more copies because some of y'all don't have copies. Okay, good. He and his wife came to see me, Adrian, and this is like 4 or 5 sessions. A session is 60 to 75 minutes, and it's pretty direct. But anyway, see, a thought went through my mind. I thought, no, we won't go there. And his whole thing was vulnerability, from my perspective. But they came to me because he started going to Hooters for lunch twice a week. Now, you might be thinking, what does Hooters have to do with vulnerability? Men don't do vulnerability very well, ladies. I don't know if you know that or not. And so she said, I said, tell me why you're here. I don't know. Tell me why you're here. Well, this blanking pervert, blah, blah, blah. Turns the air blue. And she goes, I'm sorry. I'm just sorry, but I'm sick and tired. I'm fed up. And I said, you don't have to apologize for feeling what your life feels like. But he just kind of shrugs. Was kind of, well, I don't do anything. I just, I like the view and da-da-da-da. And so about 4 sessions in, it's like peeling an onion. And out of the clear as about the Holy Spirit said, ask this. I said, hey, can I ask you a weird question? He said, yeah. I said, who was the first woman who made you feel foolish for being vulnerable? And he took a deep breath and he went, oh my gosh. Let me say it out loud. I said, or you could just think it. Thank you, Clyde. You could just think it and I'll read your mind. And then he went on to tell the story. We got more coming in behind you. He went on to tell the story about when he was 4, his mom and dad divorced, and his mom abandoned the kids. He said, I was clutching to my mom's leg, and she's walking out with me, dead-legging me to the door, pries me off, and throws me to my dad. And he said, my dad went, what do you want me to do with him? I don't know what to do with a kid. He said, I was 4 years old, and I just thought, why didn't anybody want me? And so the experience of letting himself be wanted sets him up for the expectation to be abandoned. That's trauma. And so I give you a visual. We'll do this later, but I'll just give it to you now. If you held your palm out like that, trauma is like your thumb. If you took your thumb and you folded it into the palm of your hand and then closed this is trauma. His personality developed around what happened when he was 4 years old. And so it's easier to go to Hooters and gaze at girls that wear skimpy clothes than it is to come home and relate to your wife in such a way she wants to be intimate with you. That's way too vulnerable. We just jumped in the deep end. You feel that? Y'all are kind of like, where's the beach entry into the pool? We just jumped in down there 12 feet deep. That's what that's about. We'll get to that a little bit later, okay? Let me just, a definition, all this is in here. Basically, midlife, or what I prefer, middle adulthood, from age 40 to 65. It's where men and women struggle with aging, mortality, legacy, and purpose. Men especially, ladies, they start to really struggle with their legacy. Has it mattered that I lived? What kind of impact have I made? Are my kids going to be good? Do I have enough money in the bank? Blah, blah, blah. There's a psychologist, his name is Elliot Yachts. He coined the term midlife crisis. A midlife crisis is basically, it can be characterized by two things. There's a lot of different things, but mainly the big two are despair or depression or entitlement. It's when the guy goes out and buys the red convertible and gets the Mr. T starter set, the 3 gold chains, and comes home and you're like, what in the world? And that's where it's just kind of like, basically it's a person that says, hey, I'm 53 years old and I've served everybody else. It's my time. This is what a midlife crisis is. The phrase didn't exist till, like I said there in the notes, 1965. I want to give you a biblical example of midlife. So if you have a Bible, you can open up to 2 Samuel chapter 11. I'll be reading verses 1 to 17. This is what he says. This is a story, very familiar story, of David and Bathsheba. And you say, are you reading into that? No, I think this is what men are like in midlife crisis. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And so David sent his messengers and took her. And she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. And she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. That is the last thing men in this situation want to hear. Because now the consequence has gone to another level. Watch what David does. Verse 6, so David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord and did not go down to his house. When they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house. David said to Uriah, have you not come from a long journey? Why do you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, this is integrity, men. This is leadership. Uriah said to David, verse 11, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. And then David said to Uriah, remain here today also and tomorrow, and I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next, and David invited him, and he ate in his presence, and he drank so that he made him drunk. And in the evening, he went out. See, this is scheming. David is good. He's like, hey, he just told him, hey, wash your feet, go down to your house, wink, wink. Uriah's like, nope, he slept on the porch. David gets him drunk and sends him back. And in the evening, he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter, he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. Verse 17, and the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. So basically, what David's done is he tried to get him just to go down there and sleep with his wife so he could say, oh, look, you got your wife pregnant, congratulations. Didn't work. He ups the ante, gets him drunk. The guy sleeps on a couch outside with the other men. He says, basically, Uriah was a better man drunk than David was sober. And then as a last resort, he has him killed. And now here's the irony. Uriah is carrying the letters, the orders in his own hand that gets him killed. And so Uriah died. Skip down to the very end, verse 26. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house. Such a compassionate king. She became his wife and bore him a son, but the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. For me, this is a great example of midlife because it is David who is the king, and the Bible winks at us every once in a while. He says at the time when the kings went out to war, a lot of people, men and women in midlife, give themselves permission. The gospel never does. And so I listed out for you 8 things there that kind of you see in this episode: a lack of passion for the things you were once passionate about, dulled sense of conviction, new temptations you normally wouldn't give into. A guy said to me about his mom in midlife. He came to me, his mom's 57. And I said, what is it about your mom that concerns you? And he said, she's just mean. My mom was a sweet woman her whole life, and she is just mean, McClendon. I mean, I tried to get her to come see you. She goes, I don't need no counselor. And he said, I'm like, why do people tell me this? He said, well, Mom, Neil's not a counselor. He's a pastor. She goes, that's even worse. And so I said, basically, your mom has probably held out hope that things are going to change or get better, and now she's resigning herself that they aren't, and she's starting to grieve reality. And when you finally grieve reality, the most accessible emotion is anger. But there's some other things: entitled behavior, consequence management versus conviction demonstration, scheming. The opposite of scheming, by the way, is trusting. It's harder to trust God when you get into late middle adulthood because hopefully and typically you have some disposable income, and you can just kind of shrug and go, we ain't got to do that. We're okay. We got this. I have a friend that's very successful, and I said, what's the hardest thing about you, being you? And he said, trusting God. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought this got a little burnt. Now, if I had your money, I'd still trust God. But I understand what he was saying. He was saying, I just trust myself. It's real easy because I don't really lack for anything. Now, he lives like 5 states away, and anytime he's close here, he likes to come to our church, and he's like, man, I like this. I like what, this feels good to me. And I'm like, great, the offering boxes are by the doors on your way out, amen? And put a star by number 7. Relational energy is spent on maintenance instead of maturity. Your relational energy is spent on maintenance. You're maintaining things instead of the relationship maturing. And then there's also spiritual intimacy. David displeased the Lord. And David was a man after God's own heart, and he did not have a sense. As you get older, one of the things you have to hold on to is that you have to hold on to this sensitivity for when what you're doing and how you're doing it is displeasing to the Lord. Okay? I want to cover the next one, and we'll pause for questions. Issues of midlife. They're spelled out there for you. I'll give you a little explanation on some, a little unpacking. Boredom, disconnection, and alienation. This is where we dabble in experimentation. And let me just tell you, one of the things that adults nowadays in Fort Bend County dabble in is smoking pot. We have a lot of adults in Fort Bend County that smoke pot. I see a lot of adults that are like, yeah, I'm 66 and I smoke weed. And I'm just like, who are you, Jimi Hendrix? But this is I don't tell them, oh, you're in midlife. This is one of the first characteristics or issues. It's just when you're bored, you begin to look around. Like Marcy and I tell our children who are 17 and 23, a lot of life is learning to be bored and not sin. And they look at me like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I'm like, just file it away. Just file it away. And you got to learn, because if you can't learn to be bored, then you start creating instead of receiving what God's created. Here's another example. You look up an old boyfriend or girlfriend on social media just to see what they're doing. I wasn't flirting or anything. I was just checking on them. Over-involvement in work, career pursuits. This used to be true a long time ago, this sense of if I'm loyal to the company, they'll take care of me. That's not true anymore. We are in the day of the individual, the consultant, the individual, the company is, that didn't work anymore. Especially men, I can't speak for women, men gravitate to the most tangible expression of validation that they currently experience in this stage. Let me say that again. I want to drill down this a little bit. Men gravitate to the most tangible expression of validation that they get. Like, this was about 4 years ago. I saw a couple. He was a sales manager at a car dealership. And they walked in, and I said, tell me why you're here. And he said, well, he goes, I was selling a guy a car. And he gave me your card and said, you should call this guy. And I was like, okay. I looked at why, tell me why you're here. And she said, because work is his wife and I'm his mistress. And we just kind of talked a little bit, and I said, can I ask you a really weird question? And she said, yeah. I said, if I walked in this office, we have like a bunch of sales awards and stuff on the wall. Oh, my gosh. It's like wallpapered. He's like God. He walks on water down at that dealership, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's just shrugging like, what do you want me to do, feel bad about being successful? And I looked at him. I said, what are you thinking right now? And he's like, what do you want me to say? I said, nothing. And I looked at her, and I said, I'm not excusing because you're probably going to tell me he's a workaholic. And she said, that's exactly right. I mean, 17-hour days. And I said, that's the way out there periphery. If you get to the core, your husband likes the feeling of validation he gets at work. What's the next thing she asked me? Anybody? Say what? Close. You would think, I would want her to say, how can I give him the same thing at home? Instead, what she said was, I said, he gravitates to experience. Oh, so what do you want me to do? And I said, I think it's not about not doing something. I don't know that you know how to do it based on that response. And I said, validation. I said, what do you think men want more than anything? Guess what she said? Sex. And I said, actually, men's number one need is not sex, despite what they tell you. And I said, this is as a man. A man's number one need is for respect or honor. Your husband goes to work and he works over and stays over because he feels respected and honored. Now I look over and this man is crying on my leather chairs. I'm like, hey, bro, get that tightened up there. But it was it was one of those sessions, and the lady, I mean, I don't pick sides. I mean, I've seen Leanne, our financial secretary, her office is right next door to mine, and every once in a while she'll walk out and look in the window and go, are you okay? And I don't even look up, I just do this. And they're like, what is that? I'm telling the lady in the office next door who heard you drop the F-bomb 9 times, I'm okay. But the lady she's just like, oh my gosh. And I said, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I just don't think you know how to do this. And so this is what I mean when I say that men gravitate to the most tangible expression of validation. There's some listed there. Number 5 was always a biggie, unresolved issues around intimacy. I took the time today to just write down something. These are quotes. I didn't get these out of a book. These are quotes. So when you walk by me on Sunday and go, it must be nice working one day a week, I want to punch you in the throat, but I don't. It's because I'm having these conversations. Like here's a quote. A lady said to her husband, haven't we done that enough? She was 46. One lady said, I just don't desire it. By the way, I've had men say to me before, because if you're not careful, the verbiage around intimacy, that's the church word for sex, intimacy. You never look at each other and say, would you like to experience some intimacy? If you did, your spouse would be like, what's wrong with you, dude? You've been reading books? I've had men say to me, I just don't desire it. I mean, it's just not something I think about anymore. I hate my body, don't you? Men, just write this down. You will be allowed to enjoy your wife's body about as much as she does. Did you feel that? We just stepped in the drop-off. It's like, ooh, there was a hole there. I do a lot of premarital counseling. I meet with a couple Saturday. They called me today. Hey, can we meet you on Saturday? That's my day off. I was hoping you'd ask. No, they're from out of town, and they're just in town getting their ring size. I said, yeah, I'll meet with you. And I always tell them in the first session, we talk about compatibility, physical, emotional, spiritual compatibility. And I tell them, I look at the guy and say, you will be allowed to enjoy her body about as much as she does. And guys always, they're 20, they're just stupid. They're like, she's hot, man, ain't nothing wrong with her body. Oh, where's my pipe when I need it just to whack you on the head? And I said, I didn't say you enjoying her body. I said her enjoying her body. And by the way, never underestimate her capacity to not like what she sees in the mirror. And guys are always incredulous, and women are like, yeah. And so that's something I heard. Here's another one I've heard. This is my favorite, by the way, from a guy. When I look at pornography, I'm doing my wife a favor. And now you should be thinking right now, how in the cat hair do you get to that? Because he just couldn't stop. And he basically said, my wife's not really interested in intimacy. And so I just look at pornography and I don't have any expectations of your wife. And I said, when we remove requirement from the equation, you get the lesser version of your spouse. Let me give you a visual. It's like a kite. Men, ladies, are like a kite. They need some tension on the string. That's what keeps the kite in the air. You cut the string, and the kite comes down. Does that make sense? You need some responsibility. You need to say, hey, you know what? I got to get up and go to work. I got to find a job, whatever. I got to provide. You cut that, and it's like, flunk. So these are just some issues that manifest in midlife. Infidelity, it could be 20 years ago. The kids leave, and it's like, hey, as long as the kids were here, things are good, but they're gone now, and it's me time. Number 8, put a star by that, shame and self-awareness around the body. That's not just women, that's men as well. Men joke about it, but they don't really focus on it. The last one is financial issues. Financial priorities, financial resentment, financial future. I asked a couple in counseling not long ago, I said to the lady, do you have language for how much you resent where you guys are financially? Because she kept going back to if we had only blank and describing a financial decision they made. And I said, do you have language for it? And she said, other night, I was awake in the middle of the night, and I just looked at him, and the thought went through my mind. She goes, I would never do it, but the thought went through my mind, just kind of, I said, like a shooting star. She goes, yeah. I just thought, where's my pistol? And the guy's like, well, that's encouraging. That's pretty intense example. But financial issues, I tell young men all the time, if you want your wife to get turned on, talk about your plan for your finances for the future. And the guys are always like, that's real funny. And the woman's like, no, that's great. Me like you that. When you going to retire and how much we're going to have in there. And I tell them, I don't think you can predict that, but you need to let your spouse know that, hey, I'm not thinking about just right now. I'm thinking about down the road. Because a fool gets a paycheck and says, whoa, what are we going to do this weekend? A wise man gets a paycheck and says, how do we steward this to where when we get to middle adulthood, retirement, whatever, then we can keep living the way we want to live, if not even better. Because as that great theologian Wade Burgess says, no one's going to loan you money for retirement. They're just not. They just aren't going to do that. Now, let me stop right here. Any questions about anything I've said so far? Or did I say something that spurred something in your mind that you're like, hey, what about this? Do y'all usually ask questions in this class? I'm not here. Y'all are looking like, we don't do this. You just talk and we take notes. Hackler, we do? We ask questions? Okay. So any questions so far before we get into the next section? All right, moving on. Marriage in midlife. This is what we were talking about earlier. And for those of you who came a little bit later, I'll do it again from your perspective, way over here on this side. People come to me or anybody for counseling. I just use myself. Okay. They come to me because of the way they experience their marriage. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough sex. I tell the guys on staff here, the things I can't say on Sunday. I tell the guys here on staff because they all want to be up and be a theological profound and talk about all these things. I say, hey, these people out here, they work for a living. They're not home reading the Bible 8 hours a day like you monks down here. You know what they think about? They don't have enough money, enough sex, and enough free time. And they all look at me like, I say, I'm not saying they're perverts who love money too much. I'm just saying you got to put it down here where they live. And they're like, okay. But people come because of their experience of marriage. Money's tight. We're fighting all the time. Blah, blah. It's not happy. I don't love you anymore. I doubt if I ever did. But they have the experience of marriage. Your experience, like 4 or 5 steps. Your experience of marriage is what it is because of the way you've structured your marriage. Everyone in this room that is married has structured your marriage in a certain way. Like I would say to my friend Kyle here, who's dating a girl. It's a girl, right? Okay. Just making sure. Kyle's got that look like, I don't swing that way. I own cowboy boots. So I would say when you're dating, you're really structuring, you're laying the foundation like over there on the sanctuary site. I mean, they removed 2 feet of sandy loam soil, hauled it out, hauled in stabilized field. Starting Monday, they're going to drive these pylons in the ground 5.5 feet, and they're 5 feet around. I'm like, what do we do? What are we building? The Taj Mahal? But they're laying a good foundation. That's what I mean by structure of a marriage. So the experience of the marriage is a reflection of the structure of your marriage. So you structured your marriage based on the agreements that you made in your marriage. There's things that you agreed to, not verbally like I'm going to do the inside stuff, you do the outside stuff. No, you're going to mow the yard, wash the cars, change the oil, I'm going to cook and clean. No. It's just some of it's verbal, but a lot of it's unspoken. Okay? And so the agreements that you made in marriage were informed by the agreements you made in childhood. The agreements you made in childhood were informed, lastly, by the trauma you experienced in childhood. Okay? And so that's what all that is when it talks about marriage and midlife. And so I'll unpack just a little bit. I'll give you a visual here on the board. How about that? Because when I talk about trauma, here's my definition for trauma. It's anything that occurred during childhood that was formative. Like I'll use myself. This was traumatic. And not all trauma, I need to say this, not all, you use the word trauma and everyone thinks, oh, were you molested as a kid or whatever? No. Trauma is anything that is formative to the human soul and psyche, and it causes you to kind of conform around it. Remember, we did this earlier? Your thumb is trauma. And then your personality develops around that. Like, I grew up, tell me your name right here at the table. Andy, I grew up in East Texas, a small town, about 4,000 people. You do something on Friday, everybody knows about it on Saturday, they're lying about it on Monday, okay? We were poor white trash, we lived in the country. My dad kidnapped us from Phoenix, Arizona, and that's how I got to Texas. My dad said to us, you boys want to go on a plane ride? We're like, who doesn't? I didn't know we were going to land in Texas. I thought we were going to fly around like Snoopy looking for the Red Baron, land, get some lunch. No. My dad called my mom. It was 1969. There's nothing my mom could do. She was broke. And so we lived on a farm with my dad, my stepmom, and her 2 kids, who were now my stepsisters. I loathed that lady, and I loathed those 2 girls. I was just like, I don't want to be here. Why am I here? But Andy, my dad, ran a great 20-yard dash, okay? And it's a marathon, but Leon never learned that. He was a chronic womanizer. And I remember as a little kid, my dad would talk to me, my chest would get hot. I was like, you're lying right now. But I would never say that. He'd beat you to death. But I would just be like, but I was standing there. But really what I was doing, Andy, was I was just emancipating. That's a clinical term. I was just getting as far away from my dad as I could. Matter of fact, when I dated my wife, we were talking about it, and she basically said, different language, you're a pretty moral guy. I'm like, don't seem so surprised. And I said, it's not because I'm like super Christian or whatever. I'm in ministry, which sounds terrible. Here's what really drives me. I don't want to be like my dad. And she was like, that's really self-aware and a little bit frightening all at the same time. Yes, I think my faith played into that. But I just remember just thinking, golly, Dad, I'm 8 and you're borrowing my allowance from me to go buy whiskey so you can go see a woman? And I knew that was happening. And my 2 older brothers would come and check on me and go, you okay? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, but there came a point before my dad left that I was just like, but here's trauma, okay? It starts up here. I'll give you a visual for Andy and everybody else in the room. Starts with trauma. I was 11. My dad says that my dad was 42. My dad was a great athlete, good-looking guy, very popular, very gregarious. But my dad was 42, having an affair with a 24-year-old girl on the, wait for it, Andy, just get ready, here it comes, boom! Having an affair with a 24-year-old woman on the women's church softball team that my dad coached. Just touch all the bases, Leon, grand slam! And she said, and I don't blame her, I was 11, my brother was 12, my oldest brother was 15. She said, I want you, but I don't want those kids. What does a 24-year-old want with a 15-year-old? That's her brother, not her stepson. And so my dad sat us down on the bed and said, I love you boys, but a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And my dad walked out. We lived on a farm, Andy. We raised chickens. We had 11,000 chickens. That year, I missed 47 days of school. The truancy officer came out to our farm and said, you boys got to go to school. I was like, I got to gather eggs. I got to grade these eggs. We ain't got anything to eat. We got a pitcher of water and some mayonnaise and mustard in the fridge. I ain't got time to think about school. And so one thing that happened for me that year, or really that semester, was this little voice in my head said, you're always going to be dumb. So I read a lot. And it's not trying to overcome that. I just remember that's the little stigma that's an agreement. We'll get that in a minute. That was an agreement. There was a little agreement forged back then that said your life's always going to be hard. Okay, there's never going to be anybody you can depend on, ever, 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 ever. So don't depend on anybody. I've been married 28 years, Andy. This happened. Okay, we're watching TV a couple of years ago. Some story on SportsCenter about a football player. His dad left when he was a baby, and he said, I look up in the stands, I think, is he there? Is he proud of me? I'm a good man, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes to commercial, and my sweet, beautiful, incredible, godly, brilliant wife puts her hand on my leg, and she says, now you know I'll never leave you, right? And I went, and she's like, are you kidding me? 26 years time. And I said to her, I said, the orphan in me speaks first and loudest, but not the truest. And that's because of this. Now, she says, I'm going to one day get your inner orphan and kill him. And I went, oh, he's resilient. He is a resilient little man, okay? And so it goes from trauma to this right here, to what's called, I write like a chicken, by the way, personalization. Personalization. Something happens, and we try to figure out what we did to contribute to that, to why did that happen, what did we do, what could we have done differently, blah, blah, blah. Because, I'll give you this is the human psyche. The human psyche can only take so much oppression, so much junk, so much whatever the right word is, and then it flips it and tries to make it work for itself. This is what begins in personalization. I see a lady who came to me because she said, I can't stop seducing men. And I'll probably try to seduce you during this counseling session. And I said, everybody's got a thing for a bald-headed fat guy, so just, rein it in, lady. But it's all, she said, I don't, because what happened was when she was 13, the 17-year-old kid one block over convinced her to sneak out and come over to his house and climb up the second story in his bedroom. And what happens, what you think happened, and then he spit on her and said, get your clothes on and get out of here. And she walked home, and she just said, what? She said, I was just shaking all the way home. And she just figured out, she said, everything was good while we were having sex. So the way she thinks keeps everything good in her life is she just has sex. And I said, could you count how many men you've been intimate with? And she said, oh, gosh, no. It's easily into triple digits. I was like, oh, gosh. But the trauma happens, and then personalization, and then this happens, formation. This is your, and now I'll give you 2 F words. Not that one. This is formation. This is your thumb. Your personality forms around that trauma. It's going to suppress it, keep it down. It's like riding a beach ball at the swimming pool. You're holding it under. That thing gets away from you. It breaks up and kind of shoots up out of the water. Functioning, you function. You don't really live. You're not really free. You just function. And then this happens, and this is mercy. For a lot of people, now you may be thinking, and I hope you are, what in the world does this have to do with midlife? For a lot of people, especially men, they've been the provider, the protector. Kids get out of the nest and they slow down and it's like for 65 years they've been skipping a rock. Pop, 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 pop. And finally the rock starts running out of steam and it sinks. And it's at this stage right here, a lot of people finally let themselves feel what their life feels like. Let me move this back. And they don't like the way it feels. Whoops, stuff falling over. This realization. A lot of men wake up and it's disorienting. It's like, I got to go find something to do. Because it's like all of a sudden, it's like stuff is way back here in the unconscious just kind of goes whoosh, and you start seeing pictures in your head you hadn't thought of. People, things, events, episodes that you're like, why in the world is this happening? Realization is actually God's mercy because it leads to these 2 things. Structural change, and then freedom. This is a big one right here. When you get to this stage, somebody could come up to you from this right here and say, hey, remember that time your dad abandoned y'all and you guys didn't come to school for 47 days and you almost had to go to Gatesville to the boys' reformatory? Unless you're here, and that happened all the time. They called those bastard McClendon kids. My middle brother, Mitch, was the most violent human who ever lived. I saw him break a guy's jaw and his orbital bone with one punch. It's just a lot. After that, no one fought me or my brothers. I was at a club doing the white man overbite one night, and a guy bumped into me and goes, "What's what you're doing?" And I turned around and said, "You want to go?" And this was before Christ, by the way. And a guy from across the dance floor went over, jumped in, and he goes, "Hey, man, don't fight him. That's Mitch McClendon's brother." And the guy went, "Oh, it's good, man. It's good. We're good." Tell your brother I said hi. Because when you don't, and that's not a boast on me, my brothers are rugged. When you don't process your junk, you have a lot of compressed energy. Does that make sense to anybody but me? It doesn't go away. I mean, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. But here's what I say about this. Structural change, that's like exactly what it sounds like. It's getting down to the bottom of things. Freedom. This is the entire Bible summed up right here. In Genesis, God says to Adam and Eve, you're free to eat of any tree of the garden, but this one tree don't eat. We were created by God for freedom, designed for freedom. They disobeyed, distrusted God, forfeited that freedom. Jesus comes to give us back the freedom we were created to live with and in. And this is why the Bible says in John's gospel, crazy things like, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. If the Son has set you free, you're free indeed. And so this begins to happen. And so these agreements, now remember, this is all talking about these things called agreements in marriage and midlife. There's two types of agreements, okay? Now we'll stop at the end of this section and have some questions, all right? We grow, we make these unconscious choices around these agreements with ourselves because of our family, our families and our extended communities. And so years pass and we conclude that these things are just, this is just who I am. Our identity gets confused with the agreements we had to make to survive. Let me say that again. Our identity, who we really are, gets confused with the agreements we had to make just to survive. I remember being on our farm and we had one can of tuna fish we found in the pantry, me and my two brothers. And there was no mayonnaise or anything, and we cut it open with a knife. And then we had 2 forks in the silverware drawer. And I remember just thinking, I should let my brothers have this. They're older than me, and they probably need it more than me. And to this day, Andy, don't tell anybody, I will defer, and it looks generous. If you ask a lot of people in the church, they'll tell you, he's the most generous person I've ever met. But there's a part of me that just said, hey, here's how we survive. Let them have that. Now, do I think I'm a generous person? Yeah, I think I'm a generous person. But I also know that I just, to survive, and you have to be careful that what doesn't happen is that you confuse this agreement I made to survive with your sense of identity. There's 2 kinds of agreements. Now, let me say this about agreements. There's a lot of, if you go online, you go home tonight and go, I've never heard about that. What is he talking about? There's some nut jobs out there that talk about agreements. I think it's a spiritual truth. John Eldredge is a guy that has good material on agreements. And then there's some new age kooky people that I just think, don't watch or listen to any of that. There's basically 2 kinds of agreements. There's what's called the God agreement. This is where I agree with what God says about me, that I'm deeply, unconditionally loved. I'm deeply and unconditionally loved. I'm accepted. I'm forgiven forever for everything, listen closely, I've ever done, I did today, and I will do next year. I'm already forgiven for all of that. Now, the response to that is not to say, well, then why not go out and sin? Because you're free from sin. It was for freedom that Christ set you free. Why does the Bible have to tell us it was for freedom that Christ set us free? Because once set free, we will turn around and choose a form of bondage and call that freedom. It sounds like this: I can quit anytime I want. I see a man, Mark Hackler, that is a bourbon drunk. He sat in my office last time I saw him. He goes, have you ever had any Pappy Van Winkle? That'll make your spine tingle. It's $3,000 a bottle. I was like, dude, my truck cost $3,000 when I bought it. And he's like, you should have got some Pappy. I'm like, okay. But I mean, he'll tell you, I can quit anytime I want to. And I was like, I don't think you can. But freedom, this is not in your notes. Biblical freedom is not doing whatever you want to do. Biblical freedom is doing what you were created to do. And we live in a culture that says, oh, freedom, I just, do whatever you want to do, be your own man, blah, blah, blah. No. Biblical freedom is doing what you were created to do. Like I was talking to a pastor in our city the other day, and he goes, how long have you been at Grand Park? I said, be 15 years in April. And he said, well, that's a long time. I mean, you ever think about a bigger challenge? Oh, this is plenty. Every Sunday I stand up in front of people that are enough for me. And I said, and we're way down because of COVID. And there's the people who show up, they're enough for me. The people that are home on their couch in their pajamas, they're enough for me. And he's like, how can you say that? I said, because I feel like I'm doing what I was created to do. That's freedom. It's not, I do whatever I want to do. But there's two kinds of agreements. There's the God agreement. This is permanent. It's binding. And it's because of and based on our true identity. Regardless of how much we deny it, you should parent your children to understand. Because as a parent, you are the fleshly representation of God. So you love them unconditionally. You tell them the truth. You have to tell them, hey, when you sin, don't just say to your kids, oh, you disobeyed mommy and daddy. You should tell your kids they sinned. Hey, when you sin, it doesn't change the way I think about you. And especially if they're a teenager, you should say, does that remind you of anybody? And I'm not saying they're going to go, oh, thank you for the Sunday school lesson. Sometimes they're going to be disrespectful little twits. But the experience of being unconditionally loved is deeply imprinting and cathartic because they don't get that from their peers. Their peers are catty little social media phenoms. And so there's two kinds of agreement. There's the God agreement, and then there's, I think I'm putting spiritual agreements. I refer to them as unhealthy agreements. Unhealthy because they're untrue. These are agreements that we make with struggle, with pain, feelings of worthlessness, not being good enough, shame, abandonment, betrayal, all the adjectives of separation that we can think of. Back to on the farm, when my dad left, I remember my oldest brother freaked out. I mean, we lived on 10 acres, ran out the front door, ran out in the front yard, and just rolled in the grass. And I just thought, my God, man, get a hold of yourself. And I looked over my other brother, and he's just crying, and I'm at 11, I'm standing there. This is how long ago this was. Cut off blue jean shorts, anybody remember those? Before they made them and sold them. It was just pants that got a tear in them. And by the way, when pants got a tear in them, we threw them away. Now I'd be a fashion mogul. But I had my cutoffs on and no shirt. And I looked around. I just thought, well, by God, somebody's got to be responsible. So to this day, I'm 56. All hell can be breaking out. George Grindstaff. And I'm very level-headed. I'm like, all right. I was working my fence one time, and I was putting in this lag bolt, and there was a nail sticking out of the fence, and I didn't see it. And I was turning my ratchet, and I went, Ring! And it sliced my knuckle down to the bone. Gushing blood. Our youngest daughter, Sophie's out there, and I turned to her, I said, hey, Sophie, don't panic, okay? I'm going to show you something. She's like, okay. And blood's seeping through my fingers. I said, go in the house, get me a paper towel. Oh, my God! Hey, when you cut yourself like this, babe, don't panic because your heart beats faster and you'll bleed out faster. And she's like, oh, my God! I'm like, calm yourself down. See, if you were me, you would bleed out right now. Go in the house and I go, and that night, I hear her back on the phone to her sister who lives in Richardson, and Dad was making it like a moral lesson, telling me not to panic and not bleed out. That goes back. This is the power of formation. Because I remember as an 11-year-old, my cut-off blue jeans, shirtless, my little tan body, just thinking, somebody's got to not be just crazy about this. And so it was really injustice. I ask people a lot in counseling, what's your earliest experience of injustice? That was one of mine because I just thought, y'all should be caring for me. I'm having to care for you. So one of the voices of agreement in my head says, no one's ever going to really care for you in a way that's meaningful. Like if you've been to this church 10 minutes, you notice that I joke a lot about my wife, true or false. Any of y'all remember Don and Debbie Minton used to go here? Debbie Minton told me one time, makes me so mad. You joke about Marcy. Why don't you let people know how you... I can't talk about that part of my relationship with my wife because it's way too vulnerable. I just can't. Now, if you ask my wife, hey, do you know how your husband feels about you? She would be like, oh, yeah, absolutely. But I have to keep that at bay because I formed an agreement as an 11-year-old in the midst of horribly traumatic circumstance that said this, nobody's ever going to care for me, therefore rely on yourself. And when I was 26, I met this woman who did it and then said it, never said, I'm going to care for you, just did it. Just did it. And continues to do it to this day. And so it's true. I'm deeply, deeply cared for. Now, because this doesn't stop, this temptation to form these agreements, it doesn't, not just in childhood. The temptation for me is to say, well, I got Marcy, I don't need anybody else. Not true. I tell you someone who loves me really well, Wade Burgess, is wildly generous to me. Always has been. We go to dinner, I got this, I'm like, no, you ain't got to pay for that. And it's almost like a voice going, hey, kitty, 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 kitty. When I met my wife, I think it was like a feral dog, and she just kept putting food out on the porch. And she never tried to catch me. It's just one day she left the door open, and I just walked in. Because I told Travis one day, he goes, how'd you and Marcy? I said, I was like a feral dog, and she just kept putting food on the porch. And then one day I saw the door open, and it was warm in there, and she looked happy, and I just thought, I want to be in there with her. And Travis looks at me like, you're a strange little man. But these unhealthy agreements I think I called them spiritual agreements. There's bold right in the middle. Mark this. We have inadvertently made these agreements because we think they're necessary for our survival and our acceptance. We make these because we think they're necessary. This is how I survive. And this is how I get accepted. And then notice the next line. They're motivated by ignorance and a greater love for everybody else than everybody else above ourselves. They're motivated by ignorance. I'm not saying you're ignorant, it's just you don't know. And that we love other people more than we love ourselves. The one drum that I beat consistently in counseling to grown adults is, tell me again why you do not love yourself. And they have a lot of reasons. They're very spiritual. Most of them go to church somewhere. And I tell them, hey, you would get better at loving other people and loving God if you'd learn to love yourself. Oh, that just sounds selfish. But Jesus is the most selfish person you know, because he said this is the greatest commandment. Love God by your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. There's 2 commands and 1 assumption. The 2 commands are love God and love neighbor. The assumption is you love yourself. Because Jesus says this is the fulcrum upon which you leverage your love for people. It's how you love yourself. That's this little thing right here. This is where you leverage it all right here. I'm able to love my wife and my children because I love myself. I don't love them so that they'll love me back, and if they don't, I'm going to be angry. I'm free to love them. And sometimes they don't always love me back well. Sometimes I clean the kitchen, Wes, and I think my wife's going to walk in naked and kind of go, what do you want, master? And then she looks in and goes, oh, that looks great. I'm going to go get in our room, and I'm going to go lay on our bed and watch a Blacklist. I'm like, they just murdered people. Why do you want to watch that negativity? She got a crush on that Raymond Whittington or whatever his name is. And I just think, it's like a bird flies over my head, Wes. Don't tell anybody, but I just think, did you just see what I did in here? I got the granite all clean. I got the under cabinet lights on. It's glowing. And she's just like, I do it every day. I mean, what do you want? Nothing. I want you to go watch the Blacklist. It's exactly what I want. Here's the thing. This agreement, these spiritual agreements that we make, I call unhealthy agreements, they cannot be binding because it does not have a foundation in the gospel truth or the kingdom reality. And when we live out of these things, we become like Cain. Anybody remember Cain? God said he killed his brother Abel, and God said your punishment is you're going to be a restless wanderer the rest of your days on the earth. When you have this, you make this you form this agreement with something. I'll go back to the thumb. You form this agreement with something just to survive your trauma. And it is hard to escape that because just surviving feels like, this all I want to do is survive. And look at me. All I want to do is survive. And I would say to you, the gospel says to you, God created you to thrive. And what do you mean? John 10:10. Jesus said, I am come so you can have life and have it to the full. This is not fullness. This is survival. This is fullness. This is, yes, absolutely. And this is what you're created for. But this is what we mean by when we talk about agreements. They require a lot. Turn to the page. It's got like a glacier on it. And we'll pause and take a lot of questions after this. This is what it looks like for a person to be ruled by an unspiritual agreement. The top up there is just the behavior. That's all you see. All this other stuff is suppressed. To live in light of an agreement into adulthood, especially middle adulthood, it requires a lot of energy, a lot of avoidance. And so you have behavior because you look around, look at me. You look around and you figure out based on everybody else in the room, besides yourself, what they need, and you give it to them at the expense of yourself. And so this is the behavior. But what's below the waterline are these thoughts, feelings, expectations, values, yearnings, and yourself. Like I ask people in counseling a lot, hey, can I ask you a question? They're like, oh yeah, you know what you do? And I'm like, sure, okay. Here's a question. Have you had any thoughts recently or ever in your life that you've never shared with anybody? One guy was like, say it out loud? And I said, sure. I asked a lady that question, and she was 63. And she said, I had an experimental relationship when I was in college. And I said, just for the record, I know what you're telling me in that. And that's so holy and sacred, that area of your woundedness. I'm not going to make you say it out loud, but I want you just to know that I know, and I'm not mad at you, and I'm not going to take rocks and throw them at you and call you names. And she started crying, and she said, well, why not? I said, because the God of the Bible wouldn't. Well, how do you know that? And I said, can I read to you out of the Bible? And she goes, that's not in the Bible. I said, yeah, this woman's called an adultery. Adultery is when you have sex with somebody that's not your husband or your wife. It's just as sinful as a same-sex relationship like you had in college. Where's that in the Bible? John chapter 8. Let me read it to you. I just read to her. And it led us on this great path of discovery and healing and confession. And you got to the end, and she said, all this happened because of one question. I said, yes, and our 75 minutes are up. Because if I don't crank people through here at least 4 a day, I get fired. Let's go. And she said, who's your boss? I want to talk to them. I said, I'm just kidding. And she said, thank you. I needed the break. It was heavy in here. But all those things, the thoughts, the feelings, the expectations. Men, if you want to have interesting conversations with your wife, ask her things like off this graph here, this visual. Things like, is there any expectations you had when we got together that haven't been realized? Y'all like, I'm going to get you for that. Be texting me at 2:30. We're still talking. Hope you're up. Put a star by yearnings. Somebody tell me what you think a yearning is. Yes.
I would say a desire.
Okay. I'm looking for a little bit more. Yearning. Like if your spouse said to you, I have a desire for blah, blah, blah. Mexican food, whatever. Or if they said, I have a yearning for that. Which one would you think was more serious? Yearning. Yeah. So what's a yearning? An intense longing. Getting closer. A need? Yes, a need. Unmet expectation. A yearning is an unrealized, unexperienced desire that you've begun to give up hope on. And you just comfort yourself with, but this is kind of my yearning. Did anybody watch Happy Days growing up? This is random. My wife will tell you, you're the king of random, Neil. Happy Days as a kid. Remember the episode where Howard Cunningham was going to go off to Tahiti? It was his big thing. He was like, he had a bottle of suntan lotion and a towel on his shoulder. And he was just midlife crisis. He's like, I'm going to Tahiti. Basically, I've been Mr. Cunningham, Mr. C, and da 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 da. It's ready for me to have some adventure. That's a yearning. That's a yearning. By the way, Scott O'Byrne, I've never had a desire to go to Tahiti. It doesn't cross. I'm just like, I'm good. I have a friend that asked me, why don't you vacation more? I said, because I love America and my backyard. He's like, I said, I go in my backyard and have a vacation. But, okay, let me stop right here. Any questions about anything we talked about from this or from the two kinds of agreements? Examples of trauma? Oh, man. I put them in categories, not examples. Like there's sexual trauma, there's relational trauma, there's emotional trauma. I know, I'm thinking here what I can say. A lot of it I can't say in public because I don't want the pictures in your head. Sometimes I go home and I just tell my wife's like, you okay? I'm just going to sit on the back porch and stare at the moon. Just give me 30 minutes. I'm good. We're a long way from the garden. I know a man that was whipped almost every day with a garden hose growing up. And so when he said his early 30s, he was at a friend's house and the guy was watering his flower beds. And the guy took a drink of the garden hose. And the guy said, "I'll give me a drink of that." And when he drank, he smelt the garden hose and he just threw up. When he told me that, I just cried. I was just like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry you had to experience that. He goes, yeah. He goes, I made up a lie. I told the guy I had something that for breakfast didn't settle with me, but just the smell of that, I remember getting beaten with that because his dad kept it under the seat of his truck. And I'm just like, that's the ones I got to afterwards. They'll say, your next appointment's here. I'm like, hang on a second, I return a phone call. That's kind of a lie. I'm just really creating space for me to go out the back door and stare at the playground and kind of go, geez, I will kill some people. Help me. Because there's another person out there and I need to be available and be pastoral and be but yeah, I mean, any kind of trauma, abandonment is trauma, shame is trauma. I know of a girl, I was at a youth camp, she came and she told me this. Every morning her dad was a banker and her mom was a lawyer or something. Only child, lived in a huge house. Every morning she had to come downstairs. Her parents had 2 leather chairs there and she had to stand in front of them and turn around and they would either say, okay, you can go, you look good, or they would say, oh, that makes your butt look too big, go back upstairs and change. And so she related to God where every day, at the end of the day, when she got in bed, she visualized herself coming down the stairs and standing in front of God and turning around and kind of going, is this okay? Do you approve of me? Now that came up because I talked about the unconditional approval of God one night in a sermon. And out in the crowd of like 900 teenagers, towards the back, I hear, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I thought somebody was like having a seizure or something. And it's this girl, hyperventilating. Somebody got her a paper bag. And I'm up there preaching, kind of going, hello, anybody hear something? But yeah, that's horribly traumatic. Question. Yeah, okay. My question is not that. Yes, Sherry Bement. You don't have to. This is typically the way people go. There's trauma, there's personalization, there's formation. Some people don't stay long in functioning. They skip to realization because it's kind of like, I don't like who I am and how I am. Like one of the things my wife helped me with, next time y'all see my wife, you're going to be like, come here, let me just hold you. When we first got together, we would go somewhere, and I'd be over in the corner, it'd be like 20 people in the room or 10 people in the room. They go, hey, Neil, where you been, blah, blah, blah. And we'd start talking, and I'd look across the room, and Marcy would go, which meant, rein it in, shut up, let somebody else talk. I was like, but it wasn't that I wanted to control the thing. It says, here was my thing. I felt responsible for everybody in the room having a good time. Yes, I think Christ coming in is what facilitates realization for people, but it doesn't always. This gets me kicked out of the preacher's club, Sherry, because a lot of people are like, my life was blah, 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 and then I met Jesus, and it all got better. I know people that met Jesus, they were very moral, and then they became a Christian and understood grace and sinned tremendously. As a matter of fact, that guy, he said, the biggest sins I committed after I became a Christian. And I said, yeah, it is human nature to test the people that say they love us unconditionally. And so, yes, do I think Christ makes a difference? Absolutely. When I became a believer at 18, right after I graduated high school, I would go to work, I would come home, I would take a shower, I would eat supper in front of the TV watching MASH with my mom. And I'd go to my room and read my Bible because I knew myself. I could not go to the club. I wasn't strong enough. And my buddies come by and honk, hey, we got the wine. Come on, get some bread. We have communion. I'm good. See you, fellas. And then they would cuss me out. My mom go, those are your friends? In our little Minnesota, East Texas accent. Those are not your friends. Don't you regard them? I was like, it's fine, Mom. But yeah, I think a lot of people share, and this is more of a statement about the church than individuals. A lot of people do not get discipled or deepened when they come to faith. They come to faith and the church gives them a job in volunteering somewhere instead of developing them to understand, hey, the way you've been, this is the message my wife has sent me over and over. She said it Sunday night after our community group. I could tell she was bothered. And part of me, this is my depravity, Lance. Pray for me. I just thought, I'm just going to lean into it. This morning, I'm shaving, and she said, hey, community group, you talked a lot when it first started. And I said, yeah, I just want to chum the water with a lot of words and then sit back and let y'all have it. Yeah, just as long as you were aware of that. I said, I felt you kind of patting me where no one can see. Get off me. I'm a grown woman. Let me run. But this is the message my wife sends to me consistently over and over, is that you don't have to function that way anymore, Neil. You don't have to She's never said that phrase to me, Lance, ever in my life. But the way she loves me and relates to me, she's just like, you don't do that anymore. That's so unnecessary. But it feels familiar and safe. That's why, anybody know the movie The Equalizer with Denzel Washington? Yep. Yes, the men are like, oh yeah. My favorite line in there is when he goes and talks to the guy that come from Russia to clean up the mess. And he says, hey, I made a promise to somebody I love very much. He said, I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. And I made a promise to somebody I love very much I'd never do it again. But for you, I'll make an exception. I know what it's like to be loved by a woman and love a woman so much that you're like, I don't want to be that way anymore. So yeah, this is, and some people move pretty quickly through these things, and some people get stuck right here and go, I'm fine. It's working. Somebody said to me recently, we've been married 29 years. And I said, you don't have a 29-year marriage. Let's just round it up for the sake of math. You don't have a 30-year marriage. You have a 2-year marriage cycle you've repeated 15 times. Because I asked her, I said, how many times have you left and gone to your parents? She goes, 10, 12. I said, what's the shortest? She goes, a day, the longest, 3 weeks. That's a marriage that is burning up most of their energy on maintenance, not maturity. It's like having a 71 Dodge Dart that you love, but it breaks down all the time. At some point, it's a better investment just to buy a newer car. Question. There was a question over here. He's like, I don't want that. Anybody else? Yes. The body keeps the score. I had one on my desk, and I was seeing a lady in our church for counseling. She kept looking down at it. And clear as a bell, the Holy Spirit said, ask her if she wants it. And I was like, I just got that. I want to read that. And she kept glancing down. We were talking, and I was like, you want that book? I said, are you curious about the book? She goes, yeah, what's it about? It's about how if we don't process our issues, that our body, it's called psychosomatic. If you ever heard the phrase a psychosomatic disorder, psycho is from the realm, psychological, the realm of feelings. Psycho doesn't mean crazy. From the realm of feelings, somatic, the Greek word for body is soma. Psychosomatic means your body will process. Like when my wife and I first got married, my wife grew up in a home, Earl, that they didn't do conflict. My family was crazily dysfunctional. My dad was a womanizer, blah, blah, blah. But my dad, you could look my dad in the face and go, I'm just mad as hell right now. As a 9-year-old, my dad go, that's right, boy, speak your mind. Which is crazy. But if you walked off mumbling, you got beat. Now, Marcy's family, there'd be a little tiff, a little conflict. Everybody'd go to their bedrooms, come out 2 hours later and act like nothing happened. So in conflict, I'm very level-headed. Matter of fact, I sat in on conflict resolution today. Somebody said, what was that like? It was great. The truth is what sets you free, people. Tell the truth. But when we first got married, we have a conflict. Marcia would get red splotches on her neck and chest, and I'd be like, oh, what's going on with your neck? And she'd go, no. Psychosomatic. Her body is processing. Questions? You all are either really enjoying this or you're going to go home and talk about me when this is over. And I'm okay with either one. Here, let's finish up. Yes, question. Does it really matter? A lot of people have this is such a well-exercised muscle just functioning. People have, I don't want to get all clinical here because I am a pastor, but the clinical term is capacity. We call it bandwidth or whatever. A lot of people have a lot of capacity, and they trust their capacity, but they have this really underdeveloped sense of identity. Like someone said to me 2 months ago, shortly after they started in the sanctuary, and the person said, hey, are you letting in all the way God's using you here at Grand Parkway? I mean, does this excite you? And I was like, what are you pointing at? And he's like, no, I don't. I mean, that's, all that says to me is the people of this church are faithful. And he goes, well, I mean, what do you, I said, I don't even think about myself as a preacher. And he looked at me horror-stricken because he goes to church and he's like, well, how do you think about yourself? I said, as a beloved son of the Father. And he just looked at me like, but a lot of people have a lot of capacity, a lot of just suck it up. You can tell who they are because they're not very empathic. When people are struggling, they're always like, hey, get your stuff together now, pull your stuff up, man. It's instructional. It's not incarnate. Those two words make sense. It's instructional. That's what you should do. It's like somebody's drowning, and you got a bullhorn going, hey, just put your face in the water, kick paddle, land is this way, let's go. Versus incarnate. I was a lifeguard. We were open water certified, the lake and pool. I had a kid drowned in the lake. Had to run, jump in, swim out there to him. He's a long way, too. I was like, you're past the rope, you idiot. I get out there, and he's like, I hear the gurgling. He's like, there's this, they come up one last time and they go under. When he come up to his chest and I reached out and I grabbed him by the neck. It's called the cross chest carry, Dan. Slid my arm around his armpit, turned, put the small of his back on my hip, and I just said, my name's Neil, I got you, stop fighting me. And I'm swimming in and he's, all right, stop fighting me, I'm going to bite your ear off. And the kids like giggled. And I was like, relax, my name's Neil. I'm from a town called Pittsburgh. Where are you from? Take your time, relax. Your diaphragm's going to seize up if you don't knock it off. That's incarnational. I wasn't even on duty. There were 3 other lifeguards on duty. All of them froze. I was so angry. We had a lifeguard meeting. I thought I was going to retch. I was nauseous. I was like, hang on a second. And our camp director came to me. He goes, are you angry? I said, no, it was a Christian camp. You couldn't be angry at a Christian camp, Dan. He said, are you angry? No. And he goes, you know what? You can get so angry that your body dumps all these hormones and stuff, enzymes in you, that your body has to throw up to get them out. And I said, I want to smash those people in the face, and 2 of them are girls. That ain't good. That kid was drowned in it, and she's out there on the floating dock going, ah! And so he said, I want you to lead the meeting, start the meeting off. And I said to him, I said, hey, you're wearing the red one piece and the red shorts. That means we're lifeguards. We don't freak out, okay? We go out there with them. And it was great. It wasn't conflictual, but that's incarnational. You go be with people, and you hold them until they're better. Some people are incarnational. Some people are just informative. Now, here's what you got to do. You're not asking for this, but if you're around somebody that's informative, there's a reason they're that way. One's not right and one's not wrong. They're just vastly different. Like I have a pastor friend that's informative. He tells his people all the time, and it's like, are you ever just be with them? Just be with them. That's way too messy for him. Any other questions? Yes. It depends on which one you're stuck in. But if you're stuck right here and functioning, and I'm just functioning, you don't think, I want to get to freedom. You think, hey, who can help me realize what the real issue is? It's like the guy, remember I started off the guy that went to Hooters for lunch, started going to Hooters for lunch. His issue is not soft porn. I'm going to go look at girls. His issue is, I don't know how to be vulnerable with a woman. You want to be, this is why this has these lines around it. You want to be with people that cause you to think and feel things that you by nature don't think and feel in a redemptive way. Does that make sense to anybody but me? Bueller. Let me finish up. I want to honor your time. The tasks of middle adulthood, Roman numeral 5. Basically, I want to insult you. You can read. But basically, this is where Eric Erickson referred to it as generativity versus stagnation. I prefer, and that's generativity. I put in there in your notes what it is. Generativity is a concern for your legacy. Has it mattered that I live? What kind of difference have I made? That kind of stuff. Stagnation refers to the failure to find a way to contribute. But for me, it's more accessible just to say, and I ask people this in counseling a lot, hey, who's proud of you? And they always kind of go, well, I never asked that in my life. How many of y'all saw Saving Private Ryan? Remember the scene at the end when he's standing there and it morphs from Matt Damon's face to him being an old man, and he's at the cemetery over there in France, and he's just standing there staring, and his wife comes up and he's just like, tell me I'm a good man. I've lived a good life. That's generativity. That's why it was so powerful. And if you saw it in the theater, there's 60 and 70-year-old men in there. Because that's the question deep inside all of us. I tell women this in counseling all the time. Ladies, there comes a point where saying to your husband, I love you, doesn't mean near as much as saying, I'm proud of you. You're a good man. I promise you. You say, I love you. Okay, yeah, we're supposed to say that. I'm proud of you. You're a good man. That has a lot of weight on it. But here's some of the characteristics of stagnation: being self-centered, failing to get involved with other people. If your wife is always pushing you, hey, go make friends, go join the Romeos, go do this, she's telling you something. Not taking an interest in productivity, no efforts to improve the self, and placing one's concerns over and above everyone else. That's a clinical way of saying you become really selfish. The last stage, which is the 8th stage in Eric Erickson, just in case you're wondering, it is psychosocial stages of development. It's integrity versus despair. Despair, you just throw your hands up and say, it doesn't matter. Pay attention to the last page. There's 7 major tasks. And I'm going to let you just read those on your own, but I'll draw your attention to number 6, relating to one's spouse as a person. What does that mean? Look at me. Can I go over by 3 minutes? Relating to one's spouse as a person means I relate to my spouse with the understanding that she has needs that have nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. Early on in our marriage, I said to my wife, hey, is there anything you wanted to do you hadn't gotten to do? And she said, does it have to involve you? What? Which was great. And I was like, no. So her and her 2 friends, Karen and Becca, would get away for a week and go places. But just make a note of that one. I want to end by just the gospel tasks of middle adulthood. Gospel tradition versus gospel fluency. What does that mean? Gospel tradition is you start telling yourself, oh, we've gone to church for years. We ain't got to be there every time the doors are open. Nobody at this church ever asks you to be here every time the doors are open. But it's easy the older you get. You show up about once every 6 Sundays. Versus gospel fluency, which asks the question, how does the gospel speak to this? How does the gospel inform this? The gospel is fresh, relevant, and compelling to you. The second one, engagement versus avoidance. A man came to me, he is late 60s, not too long ago, and he said, I'm concerned about my adult son, I need some help, and I don't know what to say. I said, tell me what's going on. He told me, and I just said, hey, I would talk to him like this. Son, when I'm around you, I feel sadness over the path your life has taken. Is that something we can talk about? And he said, what are you saying? It's 2 words, acknowledgement and invitation. You're acknowledging how you feel about this relationship, and you're inviting your son into a dialogue. And so it's probably 10 days, 2 weeks later, he sends me a text. No, he called me. And he just said, man, I finally got the courage to talk to my adult son. And it was incredible. He said, I kind of just wrote down what you said that day. He said, my son looked at me and said, I'm concerned, Dad. I'm concerned too, Dad. Can you help me? You see, it was a breakthrough moment in our relationship. This is what I mean when I talk about engagement versus avoidance. The older you get, the tendency is to avoid because we become more conflict avoidant as we get older. We avoid instead of engage. Community, that just means you're involved in something bigger. Accountability, you have people in your life that are helping you to Christ-likeness. And contribution, that does not mean writing checks to the church. Another thing gets me kicked out of the preacher's club. It means this: how do I make better the things that I am a part of? How do I make better the things that I'm a part of? Lance, what are you thinking?
That when you get there, it makes all those other four easier.
When you get where? Oh, yes. Yes. When you get to that place, you get reminded that you're not what you accuse yourself of being. You're not the biggest mistake you've ever made in life. You're not any of those things. That you bring value to the table. Any questions? Well, I'm going to pray. You can get out of here, go get your kids if you have them, or you can go home and talk about me. And next week, Wade will be back, and when he comes back, you can just hug him and say, thank you. Don't let that man get us anymore. Let's pray together. Oh, Jesus, thank you that you came. It was for freedom that you came to set us free. It's for freedom that you set us free. And so we don't want to abuse our freedom, but we don't want to apologize for it either. I pray for everyone in this room who's experienced any kind of trauma, that they wouldn't personalize it, because Jesus personalizes our trauma by taking it on himself on the cross, and that we can be formed, spiritually formed by the gospel and by God. And we don't have to function, we can be. And Lord, we're not afraid of any realization, anything we become aware of, habit, or anything. And so, Lord, we also embrace deep structural change because that's the ultimate expression of freedom. And so, Lord, I pray you would increase our freedom and our enjoyment of who we are and how we are, because we're created by God in the image of God. And so we're not defective, we're not dirty, we're not broken, we're not unwanted. We're the deeply loved, accepted, wanted people of God. And thank you, God, that you put somebody else in our life, a husband or a wife, to remind us that all those things are true of you. I'm not here to use you to meet my needs. I'm here to be the person that every day reminds you that you are everything the gospel says you are. I pray we'd be that for each other. In Jesus' name, amen.